Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Hi. Your faces. Thanks for being here. This is our first out of two webinars for the Crime Bill briefing. Checking it out. We're going to just start in about 5 minutes. So as you come in, feel free to put your name in the chat, introduce yourself. Thank you for this important conversation. Put your name in the chat. And I welcome you to join our opening activity. We're going to be using something called Mentimeter. If you're not familiar with it, it's an interactive tool to help people in, to educate people. And we're going to be using it to show where you're tuning in from. So drop a pin in your location. You can join by using the QR code on the side, or at the top, there's a little code that says menti.com. Type in the code. That will allow you to participate. Just want to know where you're tuning in from. This is a national campaign, and so we're trying to see where everyone's coming in. We're going to be engaging some important legislators on this, and so it'll be good to see if you have anybody from there, or take any guesses on where people are coming from. Like we got West Coast represented, got some Californians, someone's from Louisiana. All right. Welcome, everybody, if you're tuning in to our National Crime Briefing. If you want to participate in our opening activity, you can use the QR code or type in the code in the top at menti.com. And see where people are tuning in from right now. You guys are going to be really testing my geography here. But it looks like we have a good mix. We might need some more Midwesterners in here. Like Nadia. All right. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Really quick, thank you, everybody who submitted questions before the webinar. But if you have any questions throughout the presentation, use the Q&A section to insert your questions. We have a designated area at the end to get them up. So as you're going along, add those in. But I'm going to toss it over to Janos to get this started.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's really exciting to see so many people here in the middle of the day on a Tuesday to talk about this really important issue that we're going to all be dealing with soon enough. As you may or may not have heard, and it's okay if you don't know any details coming into this conversation, that's what today is all about. We are going to be facing the latest threat to criminal justice reform in this country, which is a federal crime bill that is going to be pushed by the Trump administration either at the end of this year or the beginning of next year, and probably be one of the signature issues that's debated between now and the midterm elections. What we're hoping to get out of this session today is figure out why are we having this conversation now, what's at stake, and what you can do about it. So first, a little introduction. For those who don't know me, my name is Janos Martin. I'm the Chief Advocacy Officer at Dream.org. Been here for about 5 years, based out of New York. And I've been working on criminal justice for a long time. And I think what's notable about this moment is that as an issue, criminal justice reform has been blessed with this bipartisan energy that's allowed us as an organization and so many of the people who are on this call to have really successful wins at the local, state, and even federal level over the last decade. Even our organization, we were really involved in the First Step Act that passed into law and was signed by President Trump during his first term. 85 senators voted for that. It passed overwhelmingly in the House. So we came through a moment where you could kind of count on criminal justice being one of the few issues where both sides of the aisle could work together. And even though it's been harder to do that in recent years in DC because of sort of the toxic environment in Washington, even then we've been able to have some important wins along the way and play good defense along the way where we've been able to stop bad things from happening. So that's what makes this crime bill sort of a uniquely challenging moment. Uh, as you probably have been following, this has been a year full of turbulent policies that have been pushed for and enacted by the Trump administration, right? The One Big Beautiful Bill had horrific cuts to Medicaid, and a lot of those cuts impact programs that we care about, programs that help people get on their feet after prison, help people with support programs that keep them from winding up in the criminal legal system in the first place. So it's not like it's totally new that we're having issues with this Trump administration on criminal justice. But when it comes to the substance of criminal justice policy, sentencing, supervision, conditions at the Bureau of Prisons, so far there hasn't been anything super bad that had been on the horizon until this crime bill. And when we heard that a crime bill was being worked on, and you're going to hear more details about this from our other panelists, um, we had to leap into action to figure out what was going on. And from everything that we're hearing, this is going to be a pretty bad bill. Now, here's the only silver lining. The silver lining is that, unlike most of the time when it comes to federal policy, we're finding out about this way ahead of the curve. So that gives us a chance to do something about it and to organize around it. So one of the things we're going to do towards the end of this meeting is give you more details about how to get involved and how you personally can make a difference in stopping this bill. But first, we need know a little bit more about what this bill is. And so I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Josh, who's going to take us through some more details about, to the best of our knowledge, to the best of the information we've been able to gather, what do we think could be coming down the pipeline? And then by the end of this meeting, hopefully we'll have a spirited call to action where people can sign up to do something about it. So with that, I'll pass it to my colleague, Josh.
Yeah, hi. My name's Josh Ho. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst, Manager, sorry, at Dream.org, and I've been here for almost 3 years. And I work kind of deep in the weeds on policy stuff. I live in Lansing, Michigan, in case I think I saw some other Michiganders on here. I think I saw Audrey and some other folks, maybe. Welcome to everybody. So my job here today is to kind of take you through what might be in potentially could be in the crime bill that's upcoming. I say potentially because there is no bill yet. These are all things we're just hearing and things that we are making educated guesses on based upon priorities that people on the right have suggested before. So when we go to Harrison, go ahead and go to the first slide. The one exception to that is this one, pretrial, because Donald Trump has said multiple times that the one thing that he wants in the crime bill 100% is something to do with what he calls cashless bail. Now, as most of you are familiar with, this question it's become a multi-year obsession with people kind of on the working towards this kind of tough on crime legislation. And it's a little weird because, there's really two levers that come with pretrial incarceration. The first one is pretrial incarceration itself. And we know from a lot of research that pretrial incarceration by itself causes more crime than any kind of bail prevents, or the lack of any kind of bail prevents. So pretrial incarceration by itself is what they, researchers would call criminogenic. Well, we would say increases crime. And then the second thing is bail and bail reform, cashless bail versus bail with money, whatever you want to call it. And the research on that tends to suggest that either reforms to bail have been positive or have no effect on the increase in crime. So we know that pretrial incarceration, putting people in jail instead of allowing them to be out to fight their case, results in a lot more crime than any kind of bail, one way or the other prevents. And so it's a little weird that they're so obsessed with this, but they have been for years. And unfortunately, they've been fairly successful in running some things back. Trump would like to literally anywhere where bail reform has passed, go and use federal leverage, things like burn JAG grants or other kinds of justice-related grants, and say that states or localities that have bail reform can't get any federal money unless they roll back their bail reform. And I think it's pretty clear that they're also going to try to create new federal standards for people going into federal jails for that limit pretrial release. Okay, next slide. So the next area where I think we're going to see some stuff, and we've seen stuff from folks all over the country on this, is especially when we're having the increase in crime over after COVID, is harsher sentencing. And so I think what we're going to see is some tougher sentencing laws. We'll see things like expanded mandatory minimums, especially around drug crimes. And we'll see some kind of like 3 strikes provisions. And we'll probably see, one of the things that that they've talked about a lot lately, and that we saw some modeling in with the DC legislation that they're trying to push through right now, is seriously increased penalties for juvenile defendants, including things like juveniles being treated as adults. This is something we've really, as a movement, fought back very successfully against for the last decade. So if this were to succeed, it would be very depressing, because we've really been able to push back against sentencing for juvenile crimes over the last decade. And then I think, there's been a real outrage over the last several years, even though I think most of it is fairly unfounded, on penalties for shoplifting and organized retail theft. There certainly was a little bit more organized retail theft during the COVID period, but even that, if you look at crime stats now, has decreased quite a bit. And even at that time, the company's data didn't support a lot of the things that people were saying were going on. That isn't to say there wasn't any theft, but the idea that there was an epidemic was a little bit out of line. All right, next slide. The death penalty. This is something that Trump has been somewhat obsessive about in recent weeks and months. He was very upset, and still, if you've been watching the news today, they're still pushing back very hard against President Biden's commutations of the death penalty, the death row, the people who are on death row. They really want to roll that back, and they've been trying to punish the people who got those commutations, which is very depressing, sending a lot of them to the Supermax in Colorado. And so we believe that they're going to try to expand the use of the death penalty. Since Trump has come back into office, the death penalty has increased all across the country, and they're also really moving towards increasing at the federal level. I assume that, some of his promises during the campaign, like trying to apply the death penalty to people who are selling drugs, so they've talked to some extent of people who are doing carjackings. And I've definitely seen in multiple states where they're trying to make certain sex offenses a death penalty offense. There's been a bottleneck. A lot of they've been trying to move to execution drugs, and there's been a bottleneck in a lot of those drugs, which have delayed a lot of executions. So there's probably going to be some attempt to kind of broaden and make easier for states to get execution drugs. All right, next slide. So presidential powers. I think you all are seeing this all across the country. The president seems very interested in using non-traditional means, of law enforcement in states. Everything from using the military, which gets a lot of headlines, to deploying a lot of federal troops, which doesn't necessarily, federal officers, which doesn't necessarily get the same amount of press. In some places, they've actually deployed a lot more federal officers than they deployed troops, but the end result is the same. They're trying to, in essence, put a lot more forces in these places, especially places where ICE is really trying to do mass deportations. So we think they're probably going to try to some extent, use drug trafficking and other elements of crime to broaden presidential powers to make it easier for the president to go into these places with less legal complications. I think they've also been trying to use RICO laws to target people who are protesting and people who are, in groups that they don't agree with. They've been trying to say that that's organized crime or even that it's terrorism. And I think they're going to try to find ways within the language of any law to broaden the presidential powers in this area as well. There has been some talk about using the IRS to also fight back against organizations that they don't like and people who are protesting or people on the left, or whatever the left means. And, obviously they're doing a lot to try to expand and deploy troops domestically. I even saw earlier today, the president said something about wanting to have regular troops in cities as opposed to just National Guard. So they're trying to expand that in multiple ways. Next slide. Obviously, one of the things that Trump really campaigned on was the notion that police should have absolute immunity. And so, I think we've seen this playing out with ICE officers, with other kind of prosecutions and things like that across the country. But I think they're going to continue to try to broaden protections for law enforcement officers from any kind of culpability for anything that they do. And I think especially that'll be true of ICE. And, one of the things they're really obsessed, another of the things that they're really obsessed with is attacking what some people call progressive prosecutors. Also, that one's a little strange because the way they characterize these things is so much different than the reality. In most cases, the people who came in and were called progressive prosecutors actually came in with a simple premise, which is that if we prosecuted less misdemeanors, our offices could use more resources on more serious felonies, which makes sense because most police departments spend most of their resources prosecuting misdemeanors, and the things everyone's the most afraid of are serious violent crimes. And so the premise was that, but somehow they've conflated this kind of idea, the right has kind of conflated this idea into that these prosecutors aren't prosecuting serious crime, which is really the opposite of what those people are doing. But I do think that they're going to go after any jurisdiction that has a so-called progressive prosecutor in much the same way they're going to go after jurisdictions that have bail reform. All right, next. All right, the last thing I want to talk about, and I don't think this is, in a way, this is a huge thing. In a way, it's not a huge thing. But, I've had enough conversations with the offices that are supposedly helping with writing this pending crime bill to know that one of their real priorities is to try to create penalties, additional penalties, incarcerative time for anybody who has contraband cell phones. I personally have pushed back against this for a number of years. And, if anyone here has seen, for instance, The Alabama Solution, the movie that's on HBO right now, and if you haven't seen it, I would really heartily, if you have an HBO subscription, I would heartily recommend it. That movie only exists because of the existence of contraband cell phones. And, most of the information we got about the horrors of things that were happening in prisons during COVID was because of contraband cell phones. And a lot of the reason we know anything about, for instance, the riots in South Carolina was because of what we saw on contraband cell phones. So while I do understand some of their reasons for wanting to regulate them, I think, a blanket ban means that there's very little chance that we would get a lot of the information that we've gotten that's allowed us to be able to fight against the excesses of kind of the punishment system. And so, I think that's something that'll definitely probably be in there. It's something that both Tom Cotton and Chuck Grassley have tried to get passed for years. So I'd be surprised if it wasn't there. The last thing I'll say is I think there will be an attempt to put several sweeteners in the bill that are things that certain elements of the criminal justice reform movement will like. I think there are lots of possible things that could be in there, but I doubt very seriously that the net impact of the positive sweeteners they put in there will have anything near the impact of all the things that they're doing to increase sentencing. I think the end result of whatever this bill is will be a lot more people in prison for a lot longer time. So I think I'm passing it over to Candia now. And thank you.
All righty. Thank you, Josh, for that comprehensive report. And one of the things, Josh, while this may not be law, one of the things that we are anticipating too is that as they start to put notice of funds available back out on the street for, let's say, violence intervention grants. What we anticipate is that written into some of those NOFAs or notice of funds available, we anticipate that there might be provisions around partnering with law enforcement for the purposes of immigration enforcement, so ICE enforcement. For those who don't know me, my name is Candia Milton. I am the Government Affairs Director here at Dream.org. I am based here in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. And one of the things that I always say, and Robert, you'll be familiar with this, is that, at the center of all of our campaigns and the success of all of our campaigns is really driven by, our empathy network. As much as we, on the government affairs side are responsible for managing, maintaining relationships and the strategies, it's really your involvement has really been the key to our success, any success that we've had on the Hill. And we appreciate your presence here today to learn more about, our crime bill and our strategy moving forward and how you might be able to get involved. What I want to do, though, is take a step back and really talk about, some of the past crime bills and what we've learned from those past crime bills and how they've led us to this point. What we find is that, every time there's conversations around the rise in crime and politicians, and quite frankly, that sit on both sides of the aisle, often react seeking to enact laws that are tough on crime. And so the environment that we're in is really not new. One of the first times that we can go back to where we saw a comprehensive change in laws is 1984. Many of you may be familiar with the 1984 Comprehensive Crime Control Act. And I won't read every element of these laws, but rather highlight a few where there was the elimination of parole in the federal system. It marked the beginning of really tough on crime legislation, much out of the hysteria in the moment with respect to the the surge in the usage of crack cocaine in America and in urban areas. And so we saw the increase in penalties for drugs and violent crimes happening at that time. But you can read the balance of the laws for yourself. But really want to talk about the impact that has had in our communities. What we found in that scenario in the passage of the bill was the centralization of sentencing. It removed opportunities for early release and earned time, and it expanded the prison's capacities. And as I mentioned, this bill was foundational for all the other bills that were to follow. Next slide. 2 years later, we have the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which really established and created mandatory minimum sentencing at the federal level. Many of you have been involved in our past actions around trying to eliminate the disparity between crack cocaine and powder cocaine sentences. This is where the bill that established a 100-to-1 disparity between the two, even though we know that they're the two forms of, so I say, one form of the same drug, there was a disparity, and we know that it impacted Black and brown communities. But then billions of dollars were allocated to local law enforcement, and a lot less emphasis on treatment and prevention happened as a result of this. And as you know, the establishment of the drugs are. But again, you can continue to read through. I just wanted to highlight a few of the elements of that bill, but really talk about the the impact it's had on our communities, where we saw increase of incarceration for low-level drug offenses, and as indicated, racial disparities, even though all of the data that has come back that has showed that, our white counterparts use, in this case, crack cocaine at a slightly higher rate than the Black and brown community. And so we see these disparities happening, and they're disproportionate. And even when our white counterparts are arrested for the same amounts of crack cocaine, we see that the data shows that the sentencing disparities still exist in those scenarios. Next slide. The next bill that came about was the 1988 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which really was the expansion of conspiracy provisions, which not only served as basically low-hanging fruit for low drug offenses, but also punished people who were associated with an individual who is convicted of drugs, and this is where we see the girlfriend problem, if you would, come about. And for those of you who are not familiar with the girlfriend problem, the girlfriend getting caught in the conspiracy web, even though she is not a party to any of the transactions, just by virtue of proximity, the girlfriend, and certainly we say girlfriend, but certainly mothers were caught up in this. Sisters, brothers were also caught up just by association. Were sentenced and convicted, and that's how broadly applied the drug conspiracy law was, and again impacting our communities of colors at a disparate rate. And so we go from so the impact of that has had devastating impacts on our community. Next slide, where we see the intensified racialization of drug enforcement, and it really led to the destabilization of communities, where now families are being separated, and when it comes to housing, it made it challenging for families to even find housing, having someone in their house having been convicted of drug distributions, just by way of association. Next slide. And so after the 88 crime bill came the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. Many will refer to this as the Clinton crime bill. We're all so familiar with the establishment of the super predator narrative. A lot of this was a reaction to that sort of narrative and all that flowed from that narrative, where in 88 we saw with the crime bill an expansion of the death penalty. It's under this bill that we see even a greater expansion of the death penalty. And so this is the largest crime bill in U.S. history. You can take a read of it for yourselves. Many of us are living with the impact of it. You recognize a lot of the components of this particular bill. It added 100,000 police officers to the streets. It incentivized communities to arrest more. We have the explosion of private prisons under this. We have the sting or operations that were formed between state, federal, and local governments. And so we see the largest expansion of our prison system at this point, 3-strike rules. And so, there's a laundry list of how this has impacted our communities. And certainly there was the addition of the Violence Against Women Act, which was a positive, I think, that came out of it, and was separately authored within this particular Clinton crime bill. But we see the prison prison systems throughout the country explode. And so with the first 3 acts, we saw the federal system explode, and then the federal government under this bill incentivize states to arrest people more at that time as well. Let's go to the next slide. Um, and when we talk about the expansion of the prison system, just to give you a sense of where it was really in 1970, and then how it grew, actually through and up to the crime bill. And we can take you beyond that. But we were looking in 1970 at 190,000 people within our prison system. If we take a look at it today, we have over 2 million. So just think of that over a period of time and how these bills have impacted our communities from size and scope. And then we can go to the overall impact slide. Did I miss that one, or did I? I took us through this growth period, or is it go back one? I'm sorry, I jumped this particular slide. Right. So we take a look at the intersecting and compounding outcomes of all of these bills. You can take a read for yourself, but certainly the erosion of judicial discretion has happened as a result of all of these bills. I mentioned the explosion of our system, the disparities and the separation of families, and the devastating impact that has had. But also what's important, if we talk about the school to prison pipeline, we see what happened concurrently was divestment in education, coupled with investments in prisons, where prisons took a look at fourth grade, or should I say, interested parties took a look at fourth grade reading levels and started to take a look at what's going on in those states with respect to that, and started building prisons based on those reading levels. And so instead of investing in those factors that led to those low reading levels, those low test scores, they invested in the demise of our communities by building more prisons, even though the data was showing that this was the trajectory. The investments were made to imprison folk, as opposed to dealing with the underlying issues around the challenges with respect to reading levels. And so all of that was sort of normalized over that period of time. And our primary response also to the social challenges was not to deal with the underlying issues of addiction, poverty, and mental health, but rather criminalize it. And so we saw that over the same time period as well. Next slide. So that gives you a sense of how we have historically responded to the rising crimes, which throughout the years that you've seen these bills enacted, there were actual concerns around crimes that were happening. What we see today, though, is a little bit different, or as I say, dramatically different, where you're seeing in major cities violent crimes have dropped in a number of cases, but yet the narrative around what's happening and going on in our cities are stoking, it seems to be stoking fear in our community in an effort to set the stage for why we're here today, and that is all these rumors or concerns and overtures around putting forth yet another crime bill. And so I want to talk a little bit about timeline and what we are anticipating the timeline for the bill to see a bill. I can tell you it's given what's going on politically here in Washington, D.C., it's really tough to predict what the timeline might be. Today, as you know, government is shut down. A lot of attention is around the budget. And and a back and forth around who's accountable or who's responsible for the shutdown. And so that will, that can shift at some point. But as Janos mentioned earlier on, we want to get ahead of the issue, making certain that our network, our empathy network, is prepared. And so what we anticipate is that there may be something in the first quarter of next year that comes out. We are having meetings, myself, Janos, Josh, and partners are meeting with members of Congress to get a sense of where they are with the bill right now. One of the things we want to do is build out our messaging to make certain that as a collective that we, one, understand what our messaging is, two, that we train for message discipline, and then three, as we start to talk with legislators in the form of a lobby day, whether it be virtual or in person, that we are prepared as a network and trained as a network to go into these offices and have the right kinds of conversations to make certain that we prevent any type of ugly bill, another ugly bill going forward. So I'll stand down there. I think I've taken up as much time as you guys can stand from me at this point. So I'll stand down and turn it over. Who am I turning over to, Harrison or Tori? Tori, ball's in your court.
Thank you, Candia. All right, so hi, I'm Tori Storiano. I'm a senior organizing manager here at dream.org, and I help folks like you get involved, help get the ball rolling, and help us, win some bills and get some actions going. And so I'm here today to invite you to join our National Crime Bill Response Team. And so the point of this webinar was to get things ready, because if we waited until a bill dropped, we would already be too late. And so we want to get the ball rolling. We want to start training you. We want to start organizing. We want to start getting things together so that by the time a bill drops, we are prepared and ready to go. And so the first step is to invite you to join our team. You can use the QR code on the side. You can use the link I'm about to post right now. And you can even type crime to 97483. All three of those will get you plugged in. And so we're actually going to take a 2-minute break. We're going to queue up some waiting music, and I'm going to invite you to join right now so you don't forget. And so, Harrison, if you want to cue some music. All right, hopefully you joined. Thank you everybody who did. This will be your key to getting on the call updates when the bill drops, mobilization tools, invitations to our training. All of this is part of the team. So thank you for joining. Speaking of which, if you signed up, there was a little checkbox that said, invite me to our next lobbying training. If you check that box, we will automatically invite you to this meeting, but you can already RSVP yourself because we have a lobbying training coming up Wednesday, November 19th. And so we invite each and every one of you to come by. I will say this will be hosted by our very own Josh and Candia and other members of our government affairs team. It is an amazing training. If you haven't already taken it, people will pay to take this type of training. And so get it for free, get it for you so you can be ready to lobby your legislators and help influence them once this crime bill drops. And so I'm going to throw in the link on that here, or else you can use the QR code as well, and that will get you registered. And so join us on that day, take the lovely lobbying training, and get yourself prepared. All right, we're going to open up the Q&A section. Thank you, everybody who submitted some questions before the webinar. I'll be reading some of them. Hopefully, a lot of them were answered during the presentation. I know a lot of it was, your concerns and your thoughts, and so thank you for sharing them. But I'll go ahead and read our first Q&A question. This is from Aaron. It says, this is a Q to Josh. Please explain in some detail how pretrial incarceration increases criminal activity.
So yeah, if you think about it, like the simplest possible way is the more desperate someone is, the more likely they are to commit future crimes. And the longer and more someone is incarcerated, the more likely they're going to become desperate in many different ways. There's been a lot of research done on this, but if you think about it, there are things like, say you had a job and you get arrested pretrial and you don't get bailed out, you can't make it to your job, you can't pay your bills, you can't do et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These things pile up throughout the period of pretrial incarceration, everything from trying to support your family to everything else. Say you get a sentence, your sentence is likely to be longer if you were incarcerated pretrial. The longer your sentence is, the harder it is to get back in time, the more desperate you are when you get back. Basically, the end result is just the more time you spend in jail pre-trial, the more likely you are to be kind of desperate and in need when you come out, the more likely you are to commit more crimes. I'm going to put in the chat a quote I usually read about this and a citation. So you all can read up on it too, but there's actually, this is just a summary of research, but there is a lot of research that's been done on this, and pretrial incarceration causes more crime than pretrial detention prevents. So, I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to ask more.
Perfect. Thank you, Josh. So I'm going to direct this next question to Candia, but feel free, Josh or Janos, if you have any additional information, you can add it in. So this one was from John. It says, will this bring back the Rockefeller drug laws? And maybe you can give some context for folks who might not know what that is. Oh, Candia, you're muted.
Well, I'm happy to jump in until we get Candia back here. But yeah, so for folks who don't know the Rockefeller drug laws, well, I mean, there's one definition of them that specifically relates to Governor Rockefeller's drug law policy in New York State that were some of the most punitive drug laws in the United States, passed in the 1970s and reformed in 2009 and some later years. But they were emulated, whether or not they were the literal Rockefeller drug laws, they were emulated all across the United States, in many states and at the federal level. And they were basically, these sort of zero tolerance approaches to illicit drugs that would result in people winding up with many years in prison, even if it was just possession of a certain amount or low-level dealing. And there's been an enormous amount of work the last, I guess I would say, 15 to 20 years to try to roll back some of those laws. Certainly those of you who worked with us on the Equal Act, which fell short legislatively in Congress, but did result in a number of people coming back through one of Biden's late pardons, was addressing the issue of crack disparities that Candia also mentioned earlier. So to the question of whether this bill could bring back these kinds of drug laws, yes and no, right? I don't think that on certain types of drugs, there would be a reversion to 1970s and 80s policy. Like, I don't think that we would go backwards around crack powder disparity, for example, just because I think there are enough Republicans who have worked on that issue with us that it would just be a leap for them to go backwards on the issue. However, the new drug that obviously is really at issue in a lot of communities is fentanyl. And there's already been in the last couple of years, both at the federal and state level, a lot of terribly regressive legislation on fentanyl that sort of makes the incorrect assumption that if you punish possession of it more harshly, people will stop using it. We all know that doesn't work. So I would not be shocked if something similar to the fentanyl issue was part of this larger package, just because it's already been in the public discussion for the last couple of years.
And I'm sorry, I've been having connectivity issues, and so I did. If I may add to Janos, I'm glad you brought the fentanyl up because that was gonna be part and parcel of my response. And what we've seen in recent, in just this past session or in the current session we're in, is the establishing mandatory minimums around fentanyl-related substances, and how this was a bipartisan issue, where there was the establishment of mandatory minimums here. So the reason why we are here is because we want to make certain that and want to be proactive in this space, is make certain that we can get Democrats to hold the line in a way that we were not able to get them to do it with respect to FRS or fentanyl related substances. And so to the yes and no part, we have seen some recent history where Democrats who purport to have been against the scheduling of fentanyl did vote in support of it. And so we need this network to be active in our fight to make certain that doesn't happen with the prospective crime bill. I don't know if you mentioned that before I jump back on, but
I think between us, we covered it.
okay.
Perfect. Thank you both. This next question is from Shauna, and I'm going to try to paraphrase. Let's see. So we're mentioning the parallels on top of crime policies from the 1980s on until now. But we are in a different time period than we were back then. And so the question is, how do we adapt our organizing strategies in real time to confront a government that has abandoned democratic norms entirely? What does resistance, restoration, and community defense look like when the rulebook itself has been burned?
That's a great question, and it's and I think it's an important one because we saw, for example, during the fight around the Trump budget bill, the one that he calls the One Big Beautiful Bill, we fought hard against that, as did many organizations, and millions of people took action on that in terms of contacting their representative and taking to the streets and making their voice heard. And ultimately, that didn't move really any Republican votes in Congress. I think that's really one of the issues that we have to confront, is that we have a Republican Congress that was unwilling to challenge President Trump on on these issues. And that's even for Republicans who have historically been decent on some of those issues. For example, there were no Republicans who have historically been clean energy champions who are willing to vote against gutting the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits that disproportionately benefited their communities. So what does that mean for organizing and strategy? I mean, it means for one, and this is something that you'll see if you've signed up in the link that Tori shared earlier. We are really going to focus on first and foremost making sure that all Democrats are on board here. As Candia alluded to, it's not as if Democrats have a great history federally in terms of responding to crime bills. In fact, Democrats were very much involved in some of the past crime bills. And so the worst possible outcome for us is that the Trump crime bill is introduced and then gets overwhelming bipartisan support and passes before any of us can do anything about it. So to get ahead of that, we've got to organize Democrats first and make sure that we actually have a party that's going to stand up against these terrible policies. And that's really going to be the focus of our organizing. I think more broadly, we could, that would have to be a whole nother Zoom session about like what organizing looks like in response to this kind of broader behavior from the Trump administration. But let's start with the basics. We need to have at least one party that's going to be committed to voting no, so we can use the legislative process to stop this.
To go along with that, we have a question that was sent before from Justin that says, how will we and every other organization present make it clear that Democrats that we can't concede people with politically unsympathetic convictions in this fight?
Candy, did you want to jump in on that? Or
Yeah, you know what? I had a hard time understanding the question. I'm sorry.
Just, I think the question was just, how do we fight for people with convictions that aren't easy for the public to accept?
Josh, do you want to start? And I mean, I'm happy to jump in if anything's.
I mean, it's something that everybody struggles with all the time, but I think that, one of the things we have to do is start out with solidarity about why this approach is wrong in the first place, why it doesn't make us safer, why it reduces public safety, and why treating anyone in that manner is a bad idea. I mean, so I think you have to start with a certain kind of solidarity and a willingness to stand on the principle that the solution they're providing isn't a solution at all. It's a bigger part of the problem.
And the only other thing, I think that was well said. The only other thing I would add is that if in fact this crime bill is, turns out like we think it will, like the sort of presentation Josh gave, we're going to reject it, the premise that this is actually a serious attempt to make our communities safer. So whereas if this had followed a more conventional process where there was like a bipartisan House and Senate legislative package that, there was lots of input on and it included some bad things and some good things. Those are the toughest times to negotiate around those kinds of provisions because you're trying to get consensus. I think the reality is here, we are going to reject the premise that any of this is designed to make us safer and that this administration it does have our safety in mind as they do this bill. And rather, it's a political stunt meant to embarrass Democrats and really weaponize government further. So I don't see this as being a situation in which, okay, if they like do one carve out, all of a sudden Dream.org will be on board. That's just not how we are anticipating this is going to go. So totally recognize the validity of the question, but I think we're in a slightly different fight here where I think we really have to challenge the basic premise of the whole package that's going to be coming at us.
We have a question from an anonymous attendee. It might go along with some of the other questions that are here, but is there a real concern that Democrats would vote in favor of this bill to overcome a filibuster, or in the primary concern, Republicans using the bill, the message going into the midterms?
I mean, yes.
Yes, that's why we're here. That's why That's why we're here. There's, we've seen too many times in the past that if Democrats get anxious around issues of crime and public safety, some of them might think it's easier just to vote yes and try to, take the issue off the table. And thankfully, I'll say, there's plenty of Democrats who don't behave that way in this current Congress, but I think you really only need to look back a couple years when there were a few bills relating to DC criminal justice legislation. In one case, we're able to keep the Democratic caucus unified in opposing it, and President Biden ended up supporting the no position on that, which was really important. And then in a separate vote, President Biden and then Majority Leader Schumer did not give a clear guidance that they were opposed to something, and there was a stampede, and it ended up being something like 80 to 20 in the Senate, with many Democrats joining Republicans. So we're aware that it can go either way. We can either organize together to stop this, or it can be a stampede of Democrats who are freaked out about, discussions of public safety. So the short answer to your question is yes, absolutely, there is a risk that that will happen, that Democrats will vote for it. However, I'm confident that with a good organizing plan and with a strong coalition, we can stop that from happening.
Yeah, and which is why we're trying to get out in front of this, because as much as we don't want to be caught flat-footed, we don't want Democrats to be caught flat-footed and only have the narrative that the Republicans would proffer, and so our effort is to get out there. But then something that my colleague talks about a lot, and that is not only building the right kind of message, but also putting it out there proactively, and in that controlling the message, but also message discipline. And so we want, not only as we have this training, have another training around messaging, what that messaging will look like, but then also be disciplined in saying what we're supposed to say every time, no matter what the question is, we stay on message. And so that's going to be critically important as we move forward.
I also think it's important that, even in my state of Michigan, I'm already starting to, set up discussions where I'm going to go to churches and places across the state to try to get people ready for this, so that when it happens, our senators are going to hear from a lot of people. And, maybe the right doesn't care about that, but I'm pretty sure the whole reason that the Democrats generally capitulate on these things is because they feel like it's going to hurt them politically. And we need to make sure that they know that it's going to hurt them politically if they do vote for the bill. And so, part of the reason why we're organized now is so that we can, when it drops and when people start to wobble, they've heard from their constituents that that's not going to be acceptable.
Perfect. Sorry. Thank you both, or thank you everyone for answering all those questions. We do have a few questions about state-specific work, and I know we're in the works on that. So I don't know if you guys want to kind of hint about what we might start looking like nationwide, and what state work we might start working on.
So question is it about state-specific work or about people from different states wanting to work on the federal?
That's the question, but I don't know if we have time to go over state-specific work. So I want if you want to get some broad strokes.
Yeah, I'll keep it broad. Every year Dream.org works between 6 and 10 states legislatively. I can share that next year we're going to be working for sure in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Washington, and Kentucky, and New Mexico. Those are the 6, and then we're still exploring Missouri and Mississippi. So if you're from any of those 8 states, stay tuned. I mean, you may know about the work we're doing already. I see Gabby in the chat. But yeah, if you're from one of those 8 states, then you'll be definitely hearing from us as we get closer to the end of the year about how you can be involved in the 2026 legislative sessions. Different list of states in terms of what really matters a lot at the federal level. We're going to try to meet with every Democratic senator and House member. So If you have a Democratic House member or senator, which probably is a lot of you, then as long as you've signed up to participate in this campaign, we will figure out a way to plug you in. Our priority is really going to be those offices that have historically not been great on criminal justice, where it's really important for them to hear from their constituents. So I can think of plenty of legislators in New Hampshire, Nevada, Michigan, Arizona, um, going down Pennsylvania, going down the list. There's a lot of shaky Democrats on these issues, and we're going to definitely make sure that all of them hear from you loud and clear. But I'm sure there'll be a way to plug in almost all of you, as long as you have a Democratic congressional or senator uh, representing you where you live.
Perfect. We are at time, so thank you everybody for your questions. If we didn't get to it, or you might think of one later, feel free to shoot us some emails. I'll be sending those out after the webinars, all the briefings today. So keeping a lookout for that. But thank you so much for attending. I don't know, Yana, if you want to close us out, you know.
No, Candia said it best. I mean, we are effective at what we do because of the Empathy Network, because of all your longtime support, and because the energy you bring to these campaigns. So we can't wait to work with you, whether we've been with you for the last decade or whether this is going to be your first time lobbying at the federal level. We can't wait to bring together the best possible organizing team we can. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Is that it for us?
That's it.
All righty. We'll see you at what, 6 o'clock?
We'll see you for the next one.
Yeah. And Harrison, no, thanks for the reminder around introduction. I just wanted to give a quick primer before I did the intro. So that's what I was attempting to do. Probably a longer primer than I would usually use.
No problem.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
All right. Bye.